host, Kevin Berrier, and welcome to 5 Dubs Marketing Pros, where we highlight awesome brands and the stories behind them, and maybe, just maybe, geek out on all things marketing. All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kevin Berrier, and I'm the Marketing Director of the Maryland, Delaware, DC Press Association and MDDC Ad Services. And I welcome everyone to this morning's webinar discussion. Today, hopefully, we'll be navigating the green rush together in uncovering the do's and don'ts and tips and tricks behind cannabis advertising in Maryland, from understanding the Maryland state rules and guidelines to what cannabis brands find important when considering advertising opportunities, and how to extend your reach through targeted digital advertising and marketing. Just a quick reminder that we'll be monitoring the chat throughout this morning's discussion, so be sure to drop any questions into the chat and we'll do our best to get to them. And if we don't, we'll make sure we note them down, get answers to you, and send them back to everyone after today's discussion. Lastly, this session is also being recorded, and we'll be uploading it to MDDC's YouTube channel and onto our podcast 5 Dubs, which you can find anywhere you listen to your podcasts. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our panelists today. First, I'd like to introduce Andrew Garrison, the Chief of the Office of Policy and Government Affairs for the Maryland Cannabis Administration. Andrew oversees the administration's regulatory, legislative, and intergovernmental efforts and works with cannabis businesses to provide support and understanding as they navigate through the new world of legalized adult use cannabis. Secondly, I'd like to introduce Wendy Bronfein, co-founder, chief brand officer, and director of public policy at Curio Wellness. Wendy drives the company's legislative agenda across multiple states. She oversees the Curio brand and all corporate communications. And under her leadership, Curio Wellness has become Maryland's leading medical cannabis company, securing 90% brand awareness within the first year of operations. And lastly but not leastly, Ben Bouslog, Vice President of Business Development for Adcellerant, a technology and sales enablement company headquartered in Colorado. During Ben's 8 years with Adcellerant, he's helped to shape the support, growth, scaling, and training of digital media across hundreds of media companies and tens of thousands of businesses across the globe, and was instrumental in the digital network development and strategy to reach audiences that matter to cannabis businesses. So thank you to our panelists for being here today. Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Awesome. So, Mr. Garrison, I'd like to start with you. So for us at MDDC Ad Services, as an agency that provides media buying services to businesses and other advertising agencies, among lots of other things, for us it's important to make sure that we understand everything that we need to know about the do's and don'ts of cannabis advertising through the eyes of the MCA. And that same holds true for our association's news media membership. In a lot of cases, our news media organizations, they hesitate into diving into cannabis advertising because they want to adhere to rules, but they're unsure of what the rules are, especially as adult use cannabis was legalized in July. So I guess I kind of want to start almost with a sense of ignorance. Let's assume I know nothing about the do's and don'ts and tips and tricks of what we need to know about cannabis advertising. Tell us what news media organizations need to know to be mindful as they look to move forward into the cannabis advertising space.
Yeah, thanks, and good morning, everyone. The first thing I would definitely point to from a news media standpoint is a new requirement that was put in place by the General Assembly in the statutory provision that pertains to cannabis advertising, and I'll do a statutory reference, even though I know that's annoying for people who don't read the bill, but it's 36903 of the Alcohol Beverages and Cannabis article, and therein is where there's a lot of the meat pertaining to advertising restrictions, and the chief among them that's new is pertaining to audience composition, and so what the General Assembly is now asking of licensed cannabis businesses is to make sure that there's a reasonable likelihood, or using current current audience composition data, current reliable audience composition data, that the viewers of an advertisement are 21 years of age or older, at least 85% of them. And obviously we know that that's easier to do in certain advertising spaces than others, right? We understand that with online or digital advertising, you can really cleanly micro-target stuff to make sure that no 21 or under eyeballs get onto it. But that's something that's going to be a little bit more challenging with a traditional publication or circulation. I think we understand that advertisers have that data and have circulation numbers and aspects of that, but that as cannabis businesses start to do more advertising, they should be prepared to be able to provide that to the ad buyers and the cannabis businesses, so then they can provide it to us so we can make sure that they are in compliance with the new statutory provisions.
So with that, in providing information that will demonstrate an audience composition of, you said it was 85% 21 years of age or older.
Yep.
What does that look like? And you mentioned digital. That's a bit of an easier task, and I think Ben is going to talk about that in a little bit. But from a print side, and let's think of it from the standpoint of events as well, because with news media, there's lots of different advertising opportunity, but kind of the three staples are print, digital, and events, right? So from a print side of things, like, what does that look like? What could news media organizations do to get that data in a way that's above board and that really satisfies the MCA's need?
Yeah, so I think with print, we're going to be learning as we go with this too, right? We're going to what we don't necessarily want to do is to create a situation where a firm or an advertiser is doing something that's a incredibly burdensome lift for them. But I think we would understand that this magazine or newspaper has a circulation and an average readership that is X percent whatever. The readership of the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post is probably vastly different than I don't know, do they still make highlights for kids that's in doctor's offices?
They do. My children love them. Yep.
And so understanding that, I think, is important as we think about this. And then the other aspect that I think I would plug here that is probably harder to nail down is that context would matter, right? So I have to imagine, again, that the Washington Post, the Baltimore Sun predominantly goes to households with individuals 30 or older, right? Because it's a physical newspaper. But I actually haven't gotten a physical newspaper in a while, and I'm sorry about that, y'all. But that the funny pages probably have a different readership, right? Where that might not be specifically spelled out, but I think from a regulatory standpoint, we would have a lot more questions if a cannabis advertisement showed up next to the comic section versus if it was in the business section, right? But even if there is a sort of broad understanding that this newspaper or this publication has a readership that is, mostly over 21, or not mostly, 85% over 21, and that the ad wasn't placed or designed in such a way that would likely be appealing to children, that's something we would be okay with. But what we're actually kind of most excited about is yesterday on our website, we updated new advertising guidance, and in that guidance is a data submission tool. So we're going to ask licensees to, if they want to, use that proactively to say, here's what I got from my advertiser, right? I wanted to go advertise to adults 21 years of age or older, and they told me this is going to be a great way to do it because this publication has readership that is, 25 to 35, in the key demo, whatever. And then they can give that to us, and we can look at it so we can start knowing what kind of information is available. And then also the licensee can understand if this data is going to be sufficient or if we're going to want to have a little bit of a back and forth. Additionally, this is going to be helpful for us to kind of coalesce all of our data and questions, right? Our licensees in the state, I think, understand that, sometimes we have different inspectors in different regions who maybe have different interpretations of things. And so what we want to do is make sure we're streamlining all of this data collection to say, to make sure we have kind of one set of eyes on it internally, and that hopefully everyone can get on the same page here and we can all be in compliance with the new restrictions that we have.
Okay, so you mentioned, so just just for those that don't know, when you mentioned licensees being able to use this audience composition tool that's rolled out on your website, you're referring to different cannabis businesses, different dispensaries, things like that, not necessarily the news media organizations. So can you talk a little bit more about on the audience composition tool some key pieces of data that news media organizations need to be sure to provide to their cannabis business clients to make sure that we're progressing forward and moving the needle to get, to best our chances of it being an approved advertising venue?
Yeah, and I think an important perhaps note as well is that our statutory and regulatory authority is largely limited to the licensed entities, right? There's provisions in the current statutory advertising restrictions that would prohibit a licensee from using a third party to circumvent regulations or to allow their brand or logo to be used by a third party that would circumvent regulations, but our authority just exists within that licensee. So even if a licensee was playing a little fast and loose with the rule and let someone provide a mailer to, I don't know, playgrounds in the state or something, that it wouldn't be whoever mailed that, it would be the licensed entity that we would have the authority over. So I think that's an important distinction to make, especially as we have advertisers and publications here with us today. Working backwards to answer your actual question, and I apologize, Kevin.
No, you're fine.
Thinking about some of the stuff we're going to be asking about is the kind of placements of the advertisement, right? Again, understanding that likely demographics are different at different times, right? So if something's on television or radio, and if it's airing at midnight and 1 a.m., that is likely a different listenership or viewership than if it is at 9 a.m. And that's another kind of important contextual piece of this. And so when applicable, we're going to be asking that. We might be asking about the duration, how, if you're placing this particular ad in this issue or this publication or on the station, how many weeks, months, days is it going to be running for? Again, what we anticipate being hopefully information that's readily available from an advertiser perspective and from a buyer perspective. But I think as we start to collect more data and we start to have a conversation with licensees about what is and isn't available, we're going to try to work accordingly to do that. But that's something that we want to make sure that we're starting to get, because that was something that was explicitly put in there by the General Assembly, and we want to make sure that we're able to best implement their intent.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. So we got a question in the chat. Because cannabis is still prohibited at a federal level, should news media organizations or people be concerned about advertising in a publication that's mailed through the post office to subscribers?
Can I jump in on that one?
Yeah.
So the fact that let's say it's a magazine or a newspaper and there is an advertisement in it, that is not an issue. What is an issue is direct mail. So because the mail is federal, if you were to get like one of those placards you get in the mail and it was promoting a specific cannabis brand or shop at this dispensary, that would be federally illegal because you're promoting the Schedule I substance or services through the mail, which is federal. But I would say that if you have ancillary businesses that are connected to cannabis, that is not. So, for example, if you were a packaging company that serviced, or a law firm or insurance or whatever, those are not an issue. It is what is called a plant-touching business, or a business like ours that is licensed by the state because we are plant-touching. We would not be able to use a direct mail service. But I can tell you that for 5 years, we have at times done ads in things like Baltimore Magazine, and that is not an issue because it's just an advertisement in the magazine. It's not the magazine itself.
Okay, so just to make sure I'm understanding, so an advertisement that's showing up in a magazine that's then distributed, the magazine's distributed through direct mail, we're not seeing issues there. It's let's say let's say it's a direct mail placard, like a 6-inch by 9-inch heavy stock placard that's promoting a plant touching topic or entity, that's where we would fall into trouble. So short answer, it sounds like, is for newspapers and other print media, so that distributes through the post office, as many news media organizations are doing. My local newspaper here just announced that they'll be using the USPS to start distributing. It sounds like that's not an issue. It's putting in like standalone materials or standalone collateral that's distributed through the USPS that would be a problem. Is that right?
Correct. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, got it. So we also got no. So basically, so another question in the chat says, "quote So then all print advertising products are okay." I think as it relates to distribution through the USPS, it sounds like if it's a print newspaper or a magazine that has cannabis advertising in it, that seems to be okay. But print advertising as it relates as a whole through the audience composition, some things that we'll need to watch out for is like placement, not putting an ad on or next to comics or, the kids page or kids section. So it sounds like good rule of thumb, when placing advertising into print products, looking at like main news, maybe sports away from high school sports. What else? Am I kind of starting to hit the nail, Andrew, on that? Am I correct?
Yeah, and
Andrew's doing a quick little buffer. Is that just me? There we go, Andrew. You froze up for a second, so say that again. It was probably very important.
Yeah, so the audience composition piece, particularly again for publishers, is something that is going to be important to pay attention to. The other components of this and where a lot of the General Assembly's concern is around that appealing to children, right? So that extends beyond just the audience composition. It also pertains to the advertisement itself, right? So there's prohibitions against cartoons, the advertising themselves featuring cartoons, encouraging or promoting use as an intoxicant, and anything that directly or indirectly targets children. There's also other, I think, certain restrictions on depictions, mascots, things of that nature is also something to look out for. Obscenity is prohibited in advertising as well. And then also in Maryland, the state's it's the business rights section or the commercial law section of also applies. So I can get a site for you, commercial law. 13.3, which is the unfair, abusive, or otherwise deceptive trade practices, are also prohibited in cannabis advertisements, which again should be standard for anyone who's already placed advertisements in the state. Okay, thank you. So if we were to distill down what especially print news media, needs to know about taking steps forward in cannabis advertising, be cognizant of placement. Advertisement shouldn't make cannabis use look fun, appeal to children, cartoons, people sitting around a campfire, ingesting cannabis or whatever. And from an audience composition standpoint, 85% or more, age 21 years of age or over. And I think probably one of the best ways for some of our news media membership to do that, because some will have that info and some won't. Our membership ranges from large publications to small independents. So I think, Andrew, would you say, if, conducting a readership survey, that may be over-encompassing or all-encompassing, but specifically asks, for example, are you 21 years of age or over, right? Yeah.
That would be a good first step on being able to get that collateral for licensees, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think either just an up-down into that, or again, having your demographics grouped in such a way where we could clearly draw a line between of age and not of age audience there. And then the only other thing I would plug is you mentioned events too. Events is a bit of a tricky one here because outside of the audience composition components, the General Assembly also put a pretty strict prohibition on outdoor signage in various ways, including, kind of notably billboards, but anything, kind of the like. And that could potentially intersect with events and, additional collateral around events. I think where we've talked, and the law is, I would say, presently silent on events, sponsorship, otherwise. And so I think our present interpretation would be a licensee could sponsor an event, providing it was a 21 or older event, and any sort of signage, displays, other collateral promoting that event would then also subsequently be compliant with those same restrictions that we've talked about, right? So, sponsoring a wine festival where everyone who walks into the festival gates is 21 years of age or older, awesome. But I think we would still want to be sure that the promotion of the wine festival was still going to folks 21 years of age or older, particularly if it was featuring a licensee's branded marketing materials.
Okay, great. And then it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like, there's, I don't want to say fluidity in how this will evolve, but I think it's safe to say that kind of this ecosystem is still evolving, right? And we're still understanding, kind of the do's and don'ts. And I think it sounds like as you get more data from your licensees about advertising opportunities, that'll allow you to get more of a sense of what opportunities are out there, and then we can start planning accordingly. Is that right?
Yeah, I think on the data and the audience composition side, again, for this particular group here, that's something that I think we're going to continue to learn more as we start to collect more and start to be more proactive in that sense. And that's going to be a partnership between us, our licensees, and the media partners as well. I think, then there's a separate conversation that's going to happen, with the General Assembly about advertising restrictions more broadly, to what extent they are going to be keeping, strengthening, loosening those explicit statutory requirements. I think what was potentially instructive is other industries that have been rolled out recently without similar audience composition requirements and people's satisfaction with those. And so looking at and again, really, I think the focus that has kind of continually been brought up with this issue in particular is youth access, youth appealing to children is a common refrain and concern for good reason for the folks at General Assembly. And so that's why I think this is was the starting point for the adult use advertising.
Got it. Okay, thank you. I want to move to Wendy, but I want to put a question in your ear that I want to address at the end. So I'm gonna ask it and then think about it. Maybe it's a quick yes or no answer, but then we'll get the answer at the end. In the chat, someone asked, can a business in Maryland advertise in a newspaper in Delaware, even though it's a federal law to not take it across state lines? So think on it. Don't answer it. We're going to hold everyone in suspense. I see that it's going to be an amazing answer by that reaction. So, but I want to move to Wendy and Mr. Garrison. Thank you. That was incredible information. And I think as we move forward, we're going to move forward together in kind of knitting a good path. But Ms. Bronfein, co-founder of Maryland's leading cannabis brand, a 90% brand awareness within its first year. That gives me goosebumps as a marketer. Congratulations on that. That's incredible. Yeah. So it's obvious with a 90% brand awareness, it's obvious your audience. And I think news media organizations, and myself included, really want to get a look, kind of because you can give a masterclass on this, talking a little bit about for Curio Wellness as a cannabis wellness brand, there are a lot of different products that you offer. Can you tell me a little bit more or describe your target audience? And then talk a little bit about the similarities and perhaps differences that your audience has compared to other cannabis businesses, like other dispensaries. Is your audience the same? Is it a little different? It's probably a little of both. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Sure. Thank you for having me. So just to give a little bit of background before I get into that, prior to starting Curio Wellness, my background was in television, which was my college major, and then what I did for a couple of decades before this transition. So, and specifically in that space, for many years, I was on the creative services side. So I did on-air marketing for television networks, and ad sales creative and upfront work. So when Maryland started this, and when we started to have advertising regulations under medical, I was very vocal on that process, because we started off in a place where there was a lot of restriction being put on in the draft that the regulator had sent, and I was providing feedback that the outlets themselves have their own regulator, their own counsel, and their own controls that were not even particularly wanted in the first place. So like the regulator creating additional barriers is unnecessary, because we're so limited where we start, and because there are a lot of controls that exist in the media world itself. Then, as Andrew was saying, we ended up in a really great place, honestly, with the regulations we had, and then in the legislative session, it turned into an element of statute, and I welcome any of you to join us in the fight next year, but that's going to be a continuing conversation, because I think that the choices that were put in there, mainly this piece about billboards and signs, which is really the big issue, are motivated by probably personal agendas and stigmas and things like that, because we had those tools for the previous 5 years that existed without incident or obscenity. And I think as Andrew was referring to, there's concerns about what other industries have done. And so when you think about cannabis as a vice and not as a tool, like, it gets kind of filtered in with those groups. But the truth is that anyone who's advertising, which I think are probably the ones that people are fearful of, are probably things like tobacco, gambling, and alcohol, right? Well, those are 3 industries with massive bank accounts. That's not what cannabis is. So given our limited resources, we have to be very strategic and entrepreneurial in how we advertise. So I think that's part of the reason why that argument really doesn't hold for us. But to get to your question, target audience, for us specifically, we share it with everyone in adults over 21. And we share it with the respect that we're talking to people in Maryland, because the way that the cannabis industry works is that if you're in a legal state, your products are available and legal in that state. So I like to say, like, within the 4 walls of Maryland, anything that we produce from a flower or a processed good perspective is sold only to dispensaries in Maryland. So our advertising reaches across the state, but it's only within the state. Now, we do advertise in industry trade magazines, because that's where we're speaking about our industry to each other. But that's really kind of one of the only places where we have a national conversation. For us specifically, I think we're talking to men and women. We're probably talking more to people who are about 30 to 60 plus. Part of that relates to kind of a prime advertising zone, but also it's because when we see who uses the products, now that we're adult use, there clearly is going to be recreational use, but even in an adult use market, we still see that a majority of people who are shopping are looking for relief of some type, right? They don't sleep well. They've got social anxiety. They deal with depression. Something hurts. And the older you get, the more things start to come on in life just naturally. And so we definitely think about an audience that is maybe towards the older side. Now, the other piece is the amount of disposable income, whether it's recreation, which is completely out of pocket, or from a therapeutic standpoint, there's no copay here, right? So if the average basket size, say, or I'm sorry, I shouldn't say it that way, you guys won't know what I'm talking about. In the store, if the average spend is, let's call it in the $70 range, that's an out-of-pocket expense, right? So we need to be talking to audiences that has some measure of disposable income. So concerns that I think many of the legislature had that with respect to billboards, it was, advertising in low-income areas and preying upon certain audiences, I believe are unfounded, because we need to have audiences that have income to buy these products, because it is an out-of-pocket expense, and you cannot use a credit card. So you really just have to have the debit card or the cash on hand to make the purchase. I'm sorry, what was the second thing that you wanted me to answer after target audience?
So it sounds like, so from your audience, it sounds like, obviously 21 years of age and over, but skews perhaps more to an older audience because there needs to be income expendability because of just the out-of-pocket costs associated with cannabis products, male, female, in Maryland specifically, obviously. How does that typical audience avatar, your audience avatar, how does that compare with the audience avatar of kind of dispensaries at large here in Maryland or other cannabis businesses? Do you find that's pretty similar, or do you find perhaps that your audience is unique because Curio Wellness is innately unique in who you are and what you have to offer?
So I think there are a couple different things. So for clarity for everyone watching, there's 3 license types right now. There's the grower, the processor, and the dispensary. Grower cultivates the flower, processor extracts oil from that flower and makes products, and then the dispensary is the retail location where you buy. We are a grower processor. We also have 2 dispensaries, one in Timonium and one in Elkton, and then we distribute our products to over 90 dispensaries in the state. So to answer your question, I do think we are different in the sense that we're not looking for the youngest group intentionally because of where we think kind of the real consumer probably is, and more of the consumers are. But it's also, I think, more so in the nature of how you would advertise and the outlets you're going to use. Right now, given my background, a lot of this is just common sense approach and like best practices. Like even things that Andrew was referencing that are in the law is just common sense. And again, things that I think everyone in news and in media knows, like you cannot appeal to children. You can't kind of co-opt somebody else's intellectual property for the sake of your own advertisements, and then obviously we have the other list of don't appear intoxicating and things like that. So, but I also think if you're going to want to go to those measures, then you probably don't have a good product or service to offer, because that's kind of really basic, and there's much more to say here, and there's a much more nuanced conversation. So we typically are looking to, it depends on, I guess, the status of the program. Right now, we're actually in a bit of a backwards look and a forwards look at the same time. And what I mean by that is in 2017, when this program launched, our messaging was all about kind of bringing people under the tent, making them aware that the program was there, like speaking to their curiosity and being able to educate them on what this program is, how you can find it, and why it could be an option for you. Then as the program progressed, we started to talk more about the products and services that we offer that were developed to target people's issues like sleep and GI and anxiety and pain and all the things that patients were coming for, without making, claims that in a way that we are not able to do. Now that it's adult use, what we and other operators have seen is the limitations that were put on in statute have compromised the overall awareness of the adult use program. So there's a strong belief among participants who are licensed that not everyone really knows. The topic is pretty sexy, and the news media has done a fantastic job of talking about the transition to adult use and what the program is. But still, people aren't necessarily aware that you can purchase recreationally or as an adult use method. So there is kind of a hybrid going on of the messaging we were doing about our products and services and why they're differentiated and why to look to us, but also the overarching message of like, this is here. And that's where, when you talk about events, those play in both lanes, right? Because, so for example, last year and again this year, we're sponsors at the Baltimore Running Festival, specifically of the 5K race. We had launched a product previously called Move that was designed for a topical for kind of weekend warriors and arthritic pain that doesn't have psychoactive properties. It just helps muscle joint pain. And so part of our sponsorship at that race was like, okay, that's shooting fish in a barrel. These are all runners. They have aches and pains. Let's tell them about this topical that could be an alternative to something that you get over the counter. And so the same thing persists this year, but we also know that you probably will have a lot of people who just don't even know that the program has changed, because last year when we were doing it, we met a lot of runners who didn't know that adult use was on the ballot, right? And they may have known about the medical program. So part of it is general education and part of it is product specific. We do use a lot of pathways. We no longer use billboards because we can't, but we had previously used billboards specifically on 83 and 95 or other major thoroughfares with high volume of eyeballs and clearly adult views. We do print. We've done Baltimore Magazine. Our dispensary at launch used to do the Beacon, which is a paper for older adults. We do a targeted trade magazine called Maryland Leaf that is available in dispensaries and other locations. It's just kind of a cannabis conversation. We do digital with many outlets, including we've done it with Baltimore Magazine. We have it going on right now with Baltimore Banner. We're doing stuff with WNST. We do events and activations and sponsorships as well. Really anywhere where we can be compliant with regulations and get in front of people and share our message. And some of that I think also to remember is, and this is where kind of I think the nuance comes in of being stigmatized versus being, legal and being a business. Sometimes we want to advertise because for the purposes of gaining employees, right? And that becomes a stifling lane because it's not just always about, okay, we make this product, will you come buy it?
Sure. Okay. So it sounds like for Curio, lots of different advertising entryways in to get in front of the audience that you're looking to get in front of. It seems perhaps to be a bit of a minefield, or some opportunities that did exist prior don't exist now. And I think it sounds like there's a lot of opportunity for lots of great conversation from a legislative standpoint to help move that needle. We did have some questions come in for you that I want to make sure that we answer during the Q&A. So hang tight on that. And thank you. That was amazing.
Yeah. One other thing I just wanted to add is
Sure.
obviously, if anyone here is interested in us, we're interested in you. I think that's our first barrier is always, will an outlet accept us, right? I've wanted to underwrite public radio for many years, but that's a struggle because they get federal dollars. Now, in the latest pledge drive, I heard that it's only like under 5% that they get from and I'm like, well, they only get under 5%. Can we underwrite them? But, that's part of it. And then again, we have, if you're not familiar with 280E, that is a tax penalty that cannabis companies have as a Schedule I substance. And so there is a very large amount of our profits that are paid off in taxes. So our budgets are not huge. It's a very scrappy approach to getting in front of people between the expense and between the regulations.
Got it. That makes sense. Thank you. All right. And Mr. Bouslog from Adcellerant, headquartered in Colorado. You so Colorado, one of the first states to legalize cannabis over 11 years ago now. Yeah. That's incredible. You and Adcellerant, you really kind of pioneered like navigating the cannabis digital advertising landscape. And I think Adcellerant, you guys were in a unique position in a sense that you really had a blank slate, in terms of like how you approached the digital advertising and the targeted digital advertising and as it relates to reaching a canna curious audience for canna businesses. So talk to me a little bit about what that looks like. Now, for news media organizations, obviously, there's a lot of different advertising opportunities from print to O&O digital to events, and extended digital marketing or targeted marketing in this way. They marry well with owned and operated products to give a holistic marketing opportunity for cannabis businesses. Talk to me a little bit about what Adcellerant's been doing for 11 years plus over there in Colorado.
Yeah, so it was actually an interesting start because some of our leadership actually had a prior life in the cannabis industry, both advocating, lobbying, really trying to push for that legalization when it happened in Colorado 11 years ago. And then also one of our very first partners, I think it was our first partner, it's a large media group called Voice Media Group. They're actually an owner of alternative news weeklies across the country. It starts with the Denver Westward, and then things like the Phoenix New Times. You have the Miami New Times, the Houston Press, Dallas Observer. The different kind of publications like that, all across the country. But because it's an alternative news weekly, they had a lot of people who were in the cannabis space who really wanted to advertise. So they really kind of pushed us to say, hey, how can we help our large group of cannabis advertisers be able to take advantage of digital the way that they can take advantage of our print and owned and operated products as well. So a little bit about how we got into that, but so everybody understands how Adcellerant works. We're a technology and digital advertising company, and we really try to take the complexity of digital and make it simple. Headquartered out of Denver, as you guys understand, we've been growing quickly. We've had a great time with it. And we have actually over 500 media partners that we work with across the country. Not everybody uses the Cannabis Network, or the alt network as we call it today, because kind of like what Wendy was talking about earlier, we actually created an alt network that supports the delivery of advertising that's is for the act of gambling, tobacco products as well, and for cannabis. So it's kind of cool to see how we're kind of creating this omni-channel approach for different industries. We're not industry discriminatory. A full stack digital agency solution, right? So really anything from the programmatic ad space to video to creepy geofencing products, email marketing products, social media, which is unfortunately something that cannabis industry has a hard time being able to stay in. But then also Google products, making sure that you're found on Google when people are actually looking for you. So when we look at what this alt network actually does, we had to make sure that we were in alignment with those laws, those regulations, and we're staying on the forefront of that as well because we're putting our best foot forward here to support not just our partners, those media companies, but also their advertisers. We kind of had to put our own money where our mouth was. And so what we did was we placed an emphasis on creating this alt network tied to following those rules and regulations so we could stay within those rails. We are guaranteeing a 21 and up targeting. We're focusing on better quality sites. There's other types of services out there that can help you advertise on like hightimes.com and stonerscookbook.com, things like that. But you really want to make sure you're staying in front of the Canna Curious or the people who are not your typical stoner per se. This is a really important thing. And so when we weigh our opportunities and look at exactly what this looks like, our legal team was actually very proactive in understanding what the laws and regulations were on a state by state basis. Because when you see things like, where is it medicinally recreational versus where is it recreationally available versus where is it not available at all, and it's those regulations tied to the advertising of it are very strict. For instance, in Idaho, I believe they cannot. We actually have customers who are in Washington who wanted to advertise in Idaho to get people to come across the border and re-up their stash and take it back home. They could not actually do that. The same type of thing, I think, over in Kentucky and Ohio, or I think Indiana as well. So we have to be on the forefront of understanding what those things look like. Our team does a really good job of understanding what the landscape looks like, understanding what those laws and regulations are, but it is so important, more important now than ever before, that, and I'm sure Wendy would agree, that the individual brands are also very familiar with what those laws and regulations are, and that they lean into their legal team and their expertise before they start going out willy-nilly trying to just place their ads anywhere and everywhere because they think they can make it happen, right? So what's great about this is that, weed and marijuana, all these consumables, it's not something that's just a once a year type of thing. You want to find those individuals who have that disposable income, who maybe like to party a little bit sometimes, or maybe you're just looking for some relief. I like Wendy was talking about the topicals, those active people. It's really anybody. Personally, when I lived in Denver, even outside of Denver, I live in New Orleans today. I know doctors, lawyers, marketers, accountants, lots of people who are actually cannabis consumers. It doesn't necessarily need to be just a stoner. And I think that's a misconception that a lot of people have, because we're still in this kind of weird, interesting phase where it used to be pretty dang taboo, where now it's funny to talk about. But we're heading towards kind of a time of our lives where it's not going to be taboo. It's going to be a normal part of the conversation. It's going to be like talking about aspirin, right? And aspirin's not funny. It just helps you out sometimes. So there's different times to think about that. A lot of people also think, and this is, I bring this up because a lot of brands think about, especially dispensaries in particular, hey, I just need to be on Weed Maps. I just need to be on like a Leafly. What that is, it's kind of like a walled garden of a directory. In order to be found on those places, a user has to be inside of Weed Maps. They have to be on Leafly. They have to go to these websites or download the apps. They have to be there in order to be found. What Adcellerant has done is we created this network where we're actually able to get in front of these people in every other part of the internet where they're consuming content, whether they're reading a blog, watching a video, writing a post, trying to check out all sorts of different things. It's amazing. So when you're able to get your ads in front of a much larger group, I'm going to keep picking on Wendy. I think it's so impressive having that 90% branding awareness that you guys had there. I mean, you guys placed a very important emphasis on getting the name out there, because people won't go for you unless they know about you, right? They don't need for you, want for you, or wish for you unless they know about you. So that's a big, big first step in getting out there, is promoting that brand awareness and making sure you're getting in front of people where they're at. This customer buying journey that, Adcellerant likes to train on, it's not just about branding and awareness, you guys. It's about driving interest, getting people to consider you and your brand and your service, having an intent to want to make a purchase, and then getting them to convert and also retaining that business, turn them into a repeat customer. So these are a couple of other ways that we've had some really cool strategies to support these cannabis businesses in the way that they're actually advertising. Device ID targeting, it's probably the creepiest geofencing capability on the market today.
I love me some device ID targeting.
Me too. I'll tell you what. I mean, this one's especially sexy because you're able to target people who actually went to your competitors' locations 12 months ago. Hey, I want to hit them when they went to go re-up their stash before 420 last year. I want to get them when they went. This is actually really big during the holiday and retail season. Capture those devices now. Deliver ads to them to encourage them to come to your business today.
So Ben, I have we have a question. You mentioned that for cannabis brands to kind of be seen on directory style sites like Leafly and Weed Maps and those type of apps, a consumer needs to be in that space. But for you and Adcellerant, you've been able to create a network that can place the cannabis brand outside of that space. So, and you may have answered this, but we have about two more minutes until we get into a Q&A. Yep. How does Adcellerant approach ensuring that cannabis brand, while it's placed kind of in other spaces outside of the warm blanket that is Weed Maps and Leafly, how do you ensure that the brand is placed within different websites that have programmatic stacks that are not next to, any children branding or anything like that? How do we keep that the rules that need to be held? How do you approach that? Because if not, there's quite a liability. So.
Absolutely. And it's not something that Adcellerant does on their own. We lean into a lot of third parties to be able to support us with it as well. But using these technologies, first off, the publishers that we're actually delivering the ads on, they need to guarantee an 85% plus traffic of 21 and up. That's something that's audited on a regular basis. If they miss that mark, they're left off of it for the month. If they make that mark, they're added back on for the month. So it can fluctuate. So they always trying to see that 21 and up on a regular basis. The second part is we layer in that 21 and up demographic filter. Digital is, as creepy as it can be. I can target people based on being hipsters, C-level executives, age ranges, household incomes, having a disposable income, being placed in a certain location. So that 21 and up filter is the second kind of safety net that we put in there to make sure it's safe. The other third parties that we have in place, there's brand safety settings, there's page quality settings, all sorts of things that ensure we're not being placed next to any sort of content that may look like we're trying to, encourage a younger crowd into these types of products and consumables. I would also say there's network requirements, just like what Andrew mentioned before. Actually, I'll share this one real fast, but, we want to make sure that we're not including words like marijuana. You're not able to display any sort of products on these ads. It's interesting because you can put the word weed, you can't put the word marijuana. You can have 420 on there, you can put pre-roll, you can put concentrates, but you can't put marijuana. But then the best way to do it is using, I would say, like deals. Get people across the finish line with something that makes them feel warm and fuzzy inside. Buy one, get one half off kind of thing, right? So there's all these different types of products. I'm not going to go through all these. We've got streaming television products. We've got local and organic SEO products, which are super, super important. If you are working with any dispensaries or any brands and they're not doing any SEO, I would highly recommend you try and get them into that. You can lean into my team to help you do that as well. SEO is like overhead costs. It's like keeping the lights on, right? Just make sure you're found on Google when people are looking for you. And then lastly, we've got a pretty stellar email marketing solution where we can actually place ads, a full email in front of people who are pro marijuana. Maybe they're veterans or they're looking for certain sorts of alternative or holistic remedies, all sorts of stuff like that. So there's a lot of different solutions. We've dialed it into where it fits within the rules and regulations. But lean into your partners. Don't just go out there and think you can do it, on your own. The experts are where you want to really lean into right now.
That's awesome. Thank you, Ben. Thank you. You guys are doing great things over there. Keep it up. So I want to hop into the Q&A and let's work backwards. So Ben, we just had a question in the chat. Can you expand upon how the network you've created is different from using cookies? They seem similar, but I'm curious where it differs.
There are some cookies involved in here, but as we look at this cookieless future that Google's about to stow upon us here in the near future, there's different things that we can do. So like the device ID targeting is a totally cookieless feature that we have. It's based purely off of location, exact latitude and longitude of where an individual is standing or have been standing or where they've been. Location is an exact representation of what they're doing. If you find me in a dispensary, it's not because I'm getting Mexican food. It's probably because I'm buying some pot. So you want to make sure that you understand exactly what those things look like. There's lots of other cookieless, technologies out there, but right now we're still able to lean into the cookie. We're still able to lean into site retargeting. We're still able to deliver ads to people who went to my website a handful of times and get them to come back and make a pre-order online or something like that.
Yeah. So site retargeting. That's definitely the that's definitely such a high quality and high value, especially as adult use has become legalized. Brand loyalty really comes into play. Wendy, we had a question in the chat regarding like ethnic newspapers. So like in our membership. Mm-hmm. In our news media membership, we have Hispanic newspapers, Black-owned publications. When you're looking at different advertising opportunities to reach your audience, how do you address kind of the ethnic side of things? Is there an interest there? How does that work on your end?
So in general, I think we usually have started from like much more, I'll call it like broader or mainstream, right? Because given the expense and everything, you're just trying to catch more fish, if you will. Interestingly, it's interesting you ask this because we are on the board of the National Hispanic Cannabis Council, and that group just conducted a study to understand the Hispanic community and their attitudes towards cannabis. And that the data from that report was just given to members, and the organization is going to be doing a presentation on it soon. And so that's kind of the first kind of data set I've seen that would influence media and marketing to a specific group. I haven't seen anyone else kind of do that kind of targeted assessment to understand their desires, their drivers, likes, dislikes, and things like that. And we are very data driven. So that kind of tool is useful to us to do more of a niche thing. Most of the niche kind of marketing that we've done has been, and obviously we've only been about 90 days into adult use, has been more through the lane of what is a therapeutic situation someone might have been dealing with when we were on the medical side, and targeting more specifically towards, like, are we talking to a cancer audience? Are we talking to a pain audience? Are we talking to a sleep audience? Because we were dealing in a therapeutic world, and so we were looking for the people who either were potentially using cannabis to solve the problems, or they were a potential target and didn't realize this was a resource available to them.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you. And real quick, also, Wendy, very briefly, for news media you mentioned, like, if you're interested in us, we're interested in you, right? You want to at least learn more about what's out there. Can you briefly just kind of talk about what you look for from your ad rep within a news media organization? Like, what information do you look for, and how do you want it presented to you to where it's the most efficient and effective for you without coming off as persistent and annoying?
So, I mean, it starts with the regulatory checklist, right? Now, most of the time, unless we're getting like a cold call, we're going to places that we know are, 21 and older. We need them to give us the stats, as Andrew was saying, like, if it's television, I need to see like what your average ages are during day parts or things like that. But, we're usually going somewhere we know we're safe. Beyond that, it's kind of like we want to know the reach. With some of these more local outlets, it's like, are you in a county? Are you multiple counties? Is it, there's some circulations that are kind of even more or even smaller and targeted towards certain households in certain communities. So any nuance that it gives the psychographics and demographics of your audience is great. Obviously, everything pertaining to the cost, understanding if there are discounts for volume commitments in terms of, like, are you doing ads at different intervals during the year or monthly? Or if there's bundling of, like, let's say you're, I'm just going to use like a Baltimore magazine where they're print and digital, right? If you do a bundle of assets, you get better pricing. If you have events and the events have different pieces to that offering of sponsorship or participation, but then, like, who's coming? How many tickets have you sold in the past? Like, we kind of want to know, at least for us, we want to know the full story to understand the ROI on that choice.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. And Mr. Garrison, the pressing question remains. Can cannabis businesses in Maryland advertise in a newspaper in Delaware, even though it's a federal law to not take it across state lines? What say you?
So, I mean, it probably matters on a case-by-case and contextual situation, right? So I think, again, our authority is within the licensee, right? So if the licensee is using a Delaware-based newspaper to, put an obscene advertisement next to the comic section, we would still have enforcement authority over that licensee and that licensee's action, right? I think, but obviously, there's nothing prohibiting Delawareans of, making a trip to Maryland and just, like, enjoying cannabis here in this great state of Maryland, and then going back to Delaware once, any sort of effects are worn off, or getting a safe ride home. So to that effect, I don't think there would be any immediate prohibitions there. Additionally, it would depend on to which extent Maryland law applies within Delaware. There's, certain instances where state laws defer to one another, and other instances where another state's law might take precedent over another. So, yeah, I think it would be contextual, but again, there's nothing explicitly prohibiting it. However, the licensee might still be liable for any sort of wrongdoing that's been
And
done.
I would say we've discussed this internally. This has come up in our organization. And the way that we've thought about it is mostly because from the regulatory standpoint, we don't really have interest in kind of messages that would kind of walk the line of compliance. So it really becomes more a question of most of the states that are next to us have some measure of a cannabis program. So say your message could cross into Virginia or Delaware or Pennsylvania, what are the rules, even though we're not licensed by them, what are the advertising rules in that state? Because if we're going to cross, we also don't want to break whatever their rules, even though we're not beholden because we're not one of their licensees.
That makes sense.
We look at both. We haven't done it yet, but that's what we've discussed when it's come up is like you're going to have to consider the other state as well.
Okay, so in short, if we were to shake the magic 8 ball for the answer, it sounds like probable can do, as long as we're respectful of the guidelines and rules of the state that you'd be placing the advertisement into, to be cognizant of that, and obviously, the common sense of not appealing to young audiences, images of intoxication, things like that, kind of the overarching guidelines that we've had. This has been absolutely incredible. I want to thank everyone.
Can I add one piece to that further? Because I think that
you know what, Wendy? Yes, okay. You can.
So just because I think the advertisers might like this, given the conversation. Now, I will say this is all uncharted, so we're hypothesizing.
We're navigating it together, though.
But
we're navigating it together.
What we have seen in the changeover to adult use is overall the market has been about 2x, right? So the 2 times the sales of what we saw when we were medical. But dispensary locations that are located on the borders see higher volume. So like our dispensary in Elkton sees higher volume than our dispensary in Timonium that's in the middle of Baltimore County that's really just getting from its own radius. So to this question about, if somebody's on here and they're in Delaware or Pennsylvania or even New Jersey, that's where traffic is coming to for Elkton. So I'm just putting that out there so that you'll do what you want with it.
Interesting. Well, very cool. Well, Wendy, thank you. Andrew, Ben, thank you. I feel like I am much more knowledgeable now. It sounds like there's more knowledge to be had, and I guess perhaps uncovered. So the conversation shall continue as we navigate together through the weedy green rush of cannabis out there in the state of Maryland. On behalf of the Maryland Delaware DC Press Association and MDDC Ad Services, Andrew, Wendy, Ben, thank you for taking the time today to talk to our audience about what they need to know about advertising cannabis in Maryland. For everyone that's listening in or tuning in, just a reminder, we will be putting this recording up on MDDC's YouTube channel. We'll also be distilling this down into a podcast on 5Dubs. So just a reminder, check that out anywhere you listen to your podcast. Give amazing reviews. It helps us be seen. That's our shameless plug. We'll also be sending out afterwards. We'll go through any questions perhaps that we may not have answered. We'll get answers to them and get that out to all the attendees, plus some resources that our attendees can look towards. I think Mr. Garrison has quite a few for the audience composition side of things. We'll make sure that we get, if it's okay with Mr. Garrison, to get the presentation for you, and also Ben, your presentation out to the audience. So we're gonna give you all a package of goodies to leave with. So this has been great. Thank you all, and keep a lookout on mddcpress.com and MDDC Ad Services for future webinars and different informational events. And if you're interested in marketing or media buying, reach out to MDDC Ad Services or Adcellerant. Either of us can help you. And until next time, thank you, everyone. Five Dubs Marketing Pros is hosted by me, Kevin Berrier. Our executive producer is MDDC Executive Director Rebecca Snyder. Post-production by Caroline Pecora. Our theme music is by Azulu Studio. A special thank you to our guests for being with us. You can find Five Dubs and Five Dubs Marketing Pros on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcast.